Greetings, everybody, and welcome to Windfall reading series here at the Eugene Public Library. My name is Wendy, and I work here at the library, and I'm very excited that we were able to reschedule this reading after the hideous ice storm that ruined all our lives for a few weeks. But there were silver linings, and I'm really pleased that we were able to do this again after all. So before the folks from the Lane Literary Guild come up and introduce our authors, I thought I would just give a couple of thank yous and a couple of just tips. So please, if you have your phones on right now, if you will turn off the ringers just so it doesn't interrupt the mood. And also, it is being streamed live. So if folks have questions or comments and they're watching from afar, you are welcome to ask questions in the YouTube kind of comments page right below the screen. So please do so, and we can read them at the end of the reading. Speaking of the end of the reading, there will be a question and answer period. There will be a time for you to ask questions or make comments to the authors and their work, so please do so. And help yourself to snacks in the meantime. Wanted to make a couple of thank yous as well to the Eugene Public Library's Friends of the Eugene Public Library and the Eugene Public Library Foundation. Both groups tirelessly fundraise for various events, and they help raise a lot of money so we can have programs like this. And we're eternally grateful to them. Also, the Lane Literary Guild, everybody who works for them, just fabulous people who offer all sorts of readings. They facilitate writing groups, just a wonderful group of people. So thank you to them as well. And thank you all for coming out tonight. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Joan from the Lane Literary Guild. Hello, Joan.
It's always exciting to be here. Can you hear well?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, first thing I want to tell you is that Richard Robbins has a book called The Oratory of All Souls that Erica Goss did a review of in her newsletter that's called Sticks and Stones, yes? And I was blown away when I read it. And I need his book, so you may want to buy it. But in any case, Richard Robbins was raised in California and Montana, taught in Minnesota for many years, and recently moved back west to Oregon. Lynx House Press recently published his 7th book of poems, The Oratory of All Souls. Robbins has received awards or residencies from National Endowment for the Arts, the Poetry Society of America, the Anderson Center, Willapa Bay AiR, and the Hawthornden Castle International Retreat for Writers. And his website is richardrobbinspoems.com. So welcome, Richard.
Thank you all for coming. And thanks Joan and Erica and Wendy for making this happen twice after the ice storm. I want to read one poem from my new and selected poems, which came out 7 years ago. And then most of the poems I read will be from the Oracle of All Souls. And then if there's time, I'll read 1 or 2 new ones at the end. So just this one poem from Body Turned to Rain, which is the new and selected poems. I grew up in this house in Los Angeles that had one of those formal dining rooms that have doors that closed on them. And so the table in there, it had the linen tablecloth on it, and the silver was in the hutch over there, and the china was in the hutch over there. And then it was always dark because you never used it. And then there were pictures of the ancestors, from Scotland and England on there. So so this poem just tries to evoke that. It's called Old Country Portraits. And let me set my timer. Be a good citizen. Old Country Portraits. My lost sister used to try the trick with the tablecloth, waiting until the wine had been poured, the gravy boat filled, before snapping the linen her way, smug as a matador, staring down silver and crystal that would dare move, paying no mind to the ancestor gloom, gliding across the wallpaper like clouds of a disapproving front. No hutch or bureau spared, no lost sister sure the trick would work this time, all those she loved in another room, nibbling saltines, or in the kitchen, plating the last of the roast beef. How amazed they would be to be called to the mahogany room for supper, to find something missing, something beautiful finally, they could never explain. The wine twittering in its half globes, candles aflutter, each thing in its place, or so it seemed them, even though their lives had changed for good. I wasn't going to read this poem from the new book. Now I'm reading from the Oratory of All Souls, and I'll read a little poem about that is on the cover at the end of this. I wasn't going to read this poem, but because it's such a kind of a royal level poem, it's sort of like everything that I wrote about in the book just went into the cement mixer, as Madeline DeFries, as some of you know, used to call her imagination. And out came this poem, but I'm reading it anyway. It's called Wave. Every day and always, the stray pebble finds him, an eye looking up from the path to another's execution. The camouflaged jury appears, beneath which the earth goes on with its thinking. How will he ever know the way around it? Eye looking out from a 900-year-old painting on granite, eye of salmon up from the depths of a glacial lake, eye of octopus and rat, eye of daisy, eye at the end of a sentence. On long drives across desert, the earth has its way with him, wind and grit in his face, his neck turned to leather. The sun screams quietly, the large birds circle. Over the mountains, he smells the ocean salt again, the smell of the sun's head moments after birth. The basin spreads out 80 miles toward the sea, basin of 1 million homes, 100,000 crimes of love or theft, acts of mercy, one at a time under a fog that will leave God blind for hours. Cars explode across the arteries, expanding in every direction. The salt settles on everything, living or dead. Every day and always, the wave that spins above him, a bright wash of turbulence, a prayer for the new life. He lets tide pull him from the sandy shore. He walks avenues of the great western city, nodding to strangers, casual with air, even as the undertow nags at his feet, even as persons on the beach will blur into the white of their own care. How will he ever know the daily walk, the daily way back to solid ground, to loved ones with their own rituals of renewal? How will he know the eye falls beyond him? Even the machinery of the world will find its way back from loss, even as it carries the grief of billions, even as the blood on its surface, blood of birth or blood of revolution, raises the flag of its shame and its reward. So, I don't know how to categorize that one, but I can categorize some of the other poems in this book are about people that I don't know. I'm just sort of in a position of observing. And then there's some family poems in there, and there's some poems about place. So I'll read, some of each of those kind. This next one is called "Looking for a Man in the Field," and it'll explain itself. Looking for the man in the field. Would the man stand at the end of a knife, the turned up head of cauliflower? Would the man wipe sweat from his face, fold a red handkerchief for his pocket? Would he sit in the dust and shade beside his truck and laugh between bites of a sandwich? Would he whistle as long as the tractor starts? Would the man say a rosary for each row of grapes or lettuce? Would the man curse or befriend the sun? Would he become the movement of an arm, a leg? Would he think himself some other place? On a front walk where Marisol, Peter, or even Hector, the good dog, would greet him after the light had failed? Would the man burn to nothing like morning fog in the rows? Would the man leave his shadow there? Would he walk back out of darkness like a ghost or like dawn? Would any word he is saying come from the dark, the light, or the mind? Did it find the man in the field? Did he and the field move inside each other until the word found his tongue? So there's, a couple of poems in here that started that looking for the man thing, and so here's another one of those. Looking for the man on the sidewalk. The man under a garbage bag, singing lead belly to his own breath. The man in a gray checked suit. The man like my grandfather, Los Angeles, 1958, walking on thin leather with the pickets. The man whose child grows from one hand, whose woman's arm loops through his. The man stepping out of a cab across rainwater to the democracy of stone. The man who sings too loud or goes crazy too wide, building side to curb. The man looking up like a hick from wheat country. The man looking up, wondering at the strength of glass. The man weeping into his collar. The man who sings Enrico Caruso singing opera. The man stopping to tear at a scab on his wrist. The man who tells time with each step, telling a story each time looking at his watch, tearing at a scab. The man fearing his own strength, the animal body, walking out of a bar into light. The man afraid of his father's name. The man who remembers the last day in the army, folding and stowing. The man thinking about his grandmother under a hot helmet in the beauty salon. The man whose ears ring like tin. The man who stares straight through everyone else's body, like standing up in a small boat halfway across the ocean, like standing up knowing there's something over that far curve. So those are sort of, in the manner of list poems, I guess. And all list poems, you kind of hope they add up after a while. A couple here about my parents. My mother left my father a month before I was born, and she was wise enough to take my grandmother's advice to move back in with them. And so we stayed, my sisters and I stayed with them until we all, left for college or whatever. So she laughed a lot. She had a good sense of humor, a refined sense of sarcasm, but there's always something sad about her too. August fires. The month before I was born, my stone mother moved back to her parents' house. Walls to each side of her, sliced thin as flakes of skin, narrow as finch song, pushed through windows and doors to an ear. Who knew brown liquors of smog lay all along the coast, and waves pushed up the sand, saying her name once, again, each a lover, and this stone mother too far away to hear them, any sound, not a choir of dust. I was born to that quiet house, the slate interior, the granite hum, and the rocking, and the song that once she could sing again moved out the screens, across August hillside fires to the sea, where a painted boat would wait, leaning. Like I said, it was a good thing that she left my dad. My dad just wasn't ready at 24, to be a husband. And there are probably a lot of reasons for that. And some of them, which is what this poem is about, go back to the generation before him. When he finally, had a decent childhood and his mom remarried, they lived in Fullerton. The past complete. My father's father drank until blind. He beat my father, bad and often. Who knows what drives a man to blacken the eye, break a boy's arm? We want a diagnosis. My father's mother gave him to the nuns to save his life, then took him back, surrendered him again. She worked around the worst drunks and took her beatings too. And don't dare judge her for not leaving. Our comfort once, the danger gone, boy and woman safe, the past complete. But my father's father, even now, could use the terrible love of our imagination to stop the hour, that fist, to hold this through line between us. A lot of the poems that I write are about places, but then, you kind of realize after a while that, when you're writing about people, you're writing about place. When you write about place, you're writing about people. So it's a kind of a false distinction. But I was very fortunate about 5 years ago to be invited to stay at Willapa Bay Artist in Residence place, which is far up the Long Island Peninsula in southwestern Washington, sort of on the bay side, Ledbetter Point to the very end. It's only about 2 miles wide there. And so where I was very close to Ledbetter Point. Ledbetter Point. Salal along the trail from Ledbetter Point down to the bay. Goat's beard lichen on every kind of tree. The Sitka spruce, the elkhorn moss, the broken empty egg of plover, the washed up upturned crab, the vegetable scav coyote, the elk, ghosts of the forest, moving bayside to oceanside and back, and no one knowing. The sun rising from behind the coast range, rising across the clam and oyster water. An ocean wind subsumed by fir and cedar in the mile between there and here. And shade settling onto the grove of old growth. You are never really alone, not with your lost sister's face still in the chop, your grandfather's voice drifting up the tidal flat from a cluster of boats, not with your wife and son still moving slowly in Midwest ice far over those mountains like a dream. The mind could sweep them away, or the mind could fail, and still the inner weather would find these monochrome grasses more beautiful than color. This clump of ditchweed tamped down by bears, the bald eagle's screech sudden and invisible, the heartbreak moment to moment run through by swords because break and mend is everything you didn't know you missed. Or so the angel will tell you once you recover again, or stand upright again, once you move your mouth around the holy host of first words. Far, far away from Ledbetter Point is Santiago, Chile, and there's a big hill in Santiago, Chile called San Cristobal, and on top of it is a big statue of the Virgin Mary, 40 meters high, which is very impressive because you can see it from anywhere in the city. But when I was up there, the thing that really was fascinating to me was the little devotional area off to the side with the candles and the holy cards, and that sort of thing. San Cristobal Hill. For the Immaculate Virgin, they leave a picture of the son she saved from a mystery fever. Infant of the daughter they thought lost to gangs, daughter steered home by the daily candle, grandmother made comfortable even as her mind evades her, grandfather lifting a suitcase to his side. For the mother of all, they leave barrettes, necklaces, thin leather wristbands, holy cards, one plastic rose, an unfolded fan, red pencil, scapular of the beloved. They leave a white ribbon, pink band that used to hold her hair in place, finger puppet, handkerchief tied in a bow, pacifier, shoelace, sun visor the baby wore that day in the stroller. They leave a child's rosary, and a child's rosary, and a child's rosary. At the base of the statue of the Mother of All Mercies, no one knows which objects arrive here by grief and which by gratitude. A scapular needs to be worn to grant its promise. Where is the body it belongs to? The mother kissing her daughter. Is this before the surgery or the last photo before the surgery failed? No one is telling. Here below the left ankle of the Immaculate Virgin, in a hollow below her base, where any whisper will not escape, even to the rains now dousing the candles, rains that move east to become infinite snow along the infinite granite rope of the Cordillera. So, the Oratory of All Souls is actually the title for a series of 19 paintings that were painted by Stanley Spencer about 10 years after World War I. He had served as an orderly in World War I, and he had been commissioned by a family who lost a son in World War I to illustrate a small chapel that they had on their property. So he made 19 paintings. Most of them were 5 by 7 and long, but it's a very small chapel, half the size of this room, higher ceilings. And so 16, 17 of the paintings are maybe 5 by 7, but then behind the altar there's a huge one, and then there's 2 huge paintings that run across the sides at a higher elevation of the chapel. So I wrote 19 poems about those 19 paintings. I'm not going to read all those for you, but that's where this come from. So, but the chapel, which is called the Santa Memorial Chapel, finally took on the name of the Oratory of All Souls. I mean, it assumed the name of the series of paintings. I will read you 3 from the series. Most of the poems in there were little 5, 6, 7 line poems, but I'll be reminded of how long in a minute. And I've written about paintings before, and usually I try to get some of myself into there, but these are mostly, I guess, notational is what I'd say about them. So I'll just read the first 3. There's 7 lines each. His service was at a hospital in Bristol in the west of England, and then it moved over to Salonika. And so that's where the places, how they shift. So the first one is a convoy of wounded soldiers arriving at Beaufort Hospital gates. When the first soldiers came in, they were sent to this hospital that was also an asylum. So you can imagine. Rhododendrons camouflage the iron until the last curve up macadam, where the gates swing in, take 3 men to open onto stone the lunatics still call home. New arrivals wave their flags at us. No, it's trucks of broken bodies in a story of white slings. So that's a poem about a painting that depicts that. Scrubbing the floor, where one dark meets the next in the long corridors under the earth, a man tracks in soap the wing beats of angels. All across the red tiles, bodies splayed, the failed flights, circle after circle, the trays of bread sailing over him toward every compass point of the hungry. Ablutions. We would iodine the rib wound, pat dry the bathed back. We would polish brass fixtures for art for a weekend pass. We would take the arms akimbo down from each invisible cross. We would have you lather your own hair like that on a body you might love again. So that goes on. And you can see those pictures if you Google the Oratory of All Souls and maybe add National Trust after it. You can get to the site where you can see those paintings. I also have poems in here about paintings that my friend Brian Frink in Minnesota has made. He did this cover. It's about this in real life. This is a little shore of an island up here, and so this is like the moving water. And I treat those poems a little differently. I sort of those paintings, so let those paintings just be places that a little small meditation can begin. So the title of this painting is Memory of Water, Shoreline. And then my little poem is only 6 lines. Who knew memory is concave? Who knew its tide didn't need us or our tiny boat, just to wash through and under it toward that beach, So that's the last poem in the book, and I have maybe 5 poems about Brian's paintings too. Really terrific painter. So I have time for a couple of new poems. And we'll see how long this one takes. I gave a reading about 6 months ago, and somebody said, "How do you remember all that detail?" And I do have a fairly good memory for some detail and not for some other things. So, but I said, well, I make some stuff up. So this is a poem about that in a way. It's a serious poem, but it's about that process. Summer story. Someone asked how I recalled so much detail for my poems. I told them I made things up, like whether the day was bright or gray, like if I could hear the couple fighting upstairs, like if I sensed the Radcliffe student home for the summer had any notion of what waited for her back in DC, where her boyfriend took no time to pimp her, beat her, stab her to death in an alley. I don't recall the sky that day. The neighbors may have fought. Cindy and I sat afternoons on the steel fire escape, trying to catch the canyon breeze. She read The Idiot. I read poems by Redke or Wright or Levertov, poets who seemed to know how one soul connected to the whole. None of us could see the future. That's the truth. We talked about hometowns, about never going back. Her apartment seen from the common hallway was spotless, spare. A cello leaned into a corner, a few books on the shelf, 2 pictures on the wall. The small table where she ate was covered with a plain patterned cloth, a vase of irises centered upon it. I have made this part up, except for the tidy room, except for the cello. I needed you to see how simple and shimmering those months were. We talked about books. The canyon cooled us on the landing. We kept our places neat. We were, in our own way, trying to become more saintly, following our own eccentric discipline. That's the truth. We didn't know any story's end. It's as if that summer our naive, perfected selves hung out with the other an hour at a time. I heard Pablo Casals behind my door. She heard my typing. Then we vanished to memory. We vanished, one of us, to recall, and to the making, which is the making of the story. I think I have time for 2 more. So you all know my mom left my dad. I grew up with my grandparents and my mom. When everybody was in town, was at work or at school except me, it was my grandmother and me. We had the run of the house. This is called oatmeal. Los Angeles in fog. The rest of the household off to school or work. She stands at the range in an apron she won't need, the one with washed out roses, apron so light it might fly back to Idaho, Iowa, any train town in between. She stirs, follows the box as if she still needs directions, covers and waits. I'm up on my knees in the nook, red leather crackling, and that wall behind me papered loud with hibiscus. Someone has already fussed with the newspaper. I read the comics. It's now she's placing her surprise at the bottom of our bowls. Teaspoon of jam, a pool of honey. She ladles in the oats now, 1 pat each of butter for the top, 1 splash each of cream to make our tiny moats. After the rustle at range and sink, where do the 2 of us go now, except into the deeper quiet of our meal? This bright kitchen floats at the heart of gray questions wide as the city, long as the distance from foothills to ocean. We don't say a breakfast prayer. We bow over steaming bowls. We are mastering silence. We both know something sweet waits beneath it. So this last poem is a shameless imitation of a poem that I love, and a lot of you know this poem by Robert Francis called Silent Poem. And he's basically, they're just nouns around, the country scene. So I live in Corvallis, near the university, And some of you know that there's that path that goes out past the cow barns and the swine barns, and it ends at the fairgrounds. So this is a poem in the manner of Robert Francis's silent poem, which you can Google and find. It's a beautiful poem. It's not half the poem. Here's this. It's called The Path Through the Agricultural Campus, Canada Geese Ascending. Cowshed, hay bale, tractor track, grain pile, lamb barn, sheep field, solar panel, tender chute, scrub bog, blue heron, teasel ditch, sparrowhawk, honker talk, lazy eights, fox print, coyote scat, dairy barn, tree frog, garter snake, beaver dam, willow bend, ashfall, red-tailed hawk, egret freeze, covered bridge, rose hips, creek bed, berry patch, watercress, rock green, cutthroat, stickleback, bark moss, root channel, burrow dark, needlegrass, farrow shed, swine barn, blind barn, jogger breath, llama grass, line corral, oak grove, underbrush, sun slant, cottonwood, deer mice, the large birds unfolded. Thank you.
I have to say, everyone in this room has homework to do. Write a poem that is only out of nouns, except the last word. Anyway, it was wonderful. Our next reader will be Thomas Mitchell. He's the author of 3 books of poetry, The Way Summer Ends, Caribou, and Where We Arrive, 2021. Originally from Long Island, he was raised in Sacramento and now lives in North Bend, Oregon. Mitchell studied with Dennis Schmitz at Cal State University, earned an MFA in creative writing from the U of Montana, studied with Richard Hugo and Madeline DeFries. His poems have appeared in the New England Review, New Letters, Miramar, and Valparaiso Poetry Review, etc. Recently, the featured American poet in the High Window Review in the UK. He received the 2020 Cloudbank Poetry Award. His collection, Crow Genesis, is to be released in spring of 2024. He may have it now though, right? Yeah, it's here. Early, that's very rare. By Lost Horse Press. And he connects you to losthorsepress.org. So, welcome, Thomas.
Hey, it's great to be here. And I've been in the wonder whether I ever make it. We had everything set up, and of course the ice storm changed all of that. But in a way, for me, there's some benefits about that. Because during that interim, a book, my newest book, that was supposed to come out in April, was released early. And so I had copies of that run with me. They're the only copies available right now. And you're the only people who will ever hear these poems, at least for a couple of weeks. And and I'm really happy to be here, like I said. Thank you, Cheryl and Erica, and Wendy. So, the book Where We Arrive was published and released during the pandemic. It doesn't receive much attention. People are thinking about lots of other things. And this was the book, like I said, that I was going to use today. But there is at least one poem I'd like to read from this book. Yes, I am from Long Island originally, and that's one reason I'm reading this poem, because it's about Long Island. It's about Long Island Sound, actually. And it's also, it also water runs through it. You know, just like the river runs through it. Okay, water is an absolutely wonderful, magical vehicle, I find, to use in poetry. And a number of my poems contain water. And I've lived my whole life near the water. I was born on Long Island, so right there on Long Island Sound, spent a lot of time there in the water. I was in the Navy, on board ship. I was stationed in Corpus Christi on the Gulf of Mexico. I live now in North Bend, so I spend an awful lot of time. I get up in the morning. It's absolutely wonderful for me to hear nothing but the roar of the sea. It's just fantastic. So, and another reason I'm going to read this poem is because when Rick and I were at the University of Montana, there was another guy from Long Island there, and his name was Andrew Grossbart. And I got to be pretty close friends with Andy. And I remember him saying to me, Tom, have you ever gotten anything out of your writing referring to Long Island? And I thought, well, actually, and he said, yeah, neither have I. You know, and it has taken me a lifetime to finally pull some of that to the forefront. Unfortunately, in our second year at University of Montana writing program, Andy went away for Christmas and he never came back. He committed suicide. And it was very, very painful for all of us. And so I'm dedicating this poem to Andrew Grossbart. Kayaking, Long Island Sound. I'm strolling along the beach this cold, bleak morning, pale sea grass bending in the wind, when there, up ahead, in the lustrous surf, I see a kayaker, sleek as a seal, cutting through the waves, lifting his paddle to the broken sunlight. I'm approaching 73, agile as an easy chair. But this is where my longing starts, the yearning for another life. The one where I'm lean and muscular, where I shoulder my kayak, stride into the waves, and in one fluid movement, lift myself into the seat, then over the breakers. I'm waiting for the vessel to right, when I'm pulled through a series of surging rifts, water brimming across an invisible bow. The kayak moving on its own accord and settling into a more even flow. I dip the paddle, counterbalancing my weight, leaning into the sea's wake. Now one with the kayak, wind at my back, paddling through a spitting drizzle, in an endless straight line as I push through emerald chalk into a plateau of silence. This is when it gets good. The sun comes out and turns the sea a radiant blue. 3 pelicans rattle by on their way to somewhere. Anyway, the brand new book is called Progenesis, and I'm excited to read these for the first time. I had to kind of refresh myself the day before yesterday. And it's divided, actually, it's divided into 5 sections. And the first section is called Paper Boats. And it contains a lot of childhood, boyhood, memory, and imagination. And then the second section is called Returning to the River, and of course there's a lot of water involved in there. But it also is looking back to the past. The third section is it's the title Progenesis. Yes, I've never read that book. And so these poems are a bit strange because they actually are based on a metamorphosis of prose becoming into human form. The fourth one is called Arguments. And arguments are wonderful things to write about, all kinds of arguments, because of all the tension, of course, and just a feeling of urgency. And I love the way the pace of the poetry goes. And the final section is, do you have any gardeners here? It's called Working the Earth. And so all of these poems have something to do with plants and growing and gardening. And of course, about a lot of other things. Here's the first one. It's called Red Bicycle. When I was a boy, my father purchased a red bicycle for me. But the pedals were beyond my reach. So he fastened wooden blocks to them, and I began to wheel around inches higher than my usual height. Touching the underside of overhead leaves, autumn in my hair, my new bike spinning over sidewalks, sound of the chain whirring on its sprocket and hopping gleefully over curbs, negotiating the dangerous edges where our neighborhood stretched out as far as the eye can see, not knowing how far I could go. And finally, after what seems just a couple of blocks, I'm there. This next one is a highly imaginary poem, but it's also based on some fact and research. It's called Expedition. Following the blue line across the boat's bow, I spy the name Arctic Fox, then a trajectory of white ice drifting away on the horizon. The crew includes 4 scientists and myself, a combination cook and bottle washer, who would no more ride the high seas than lasso the lead car on a roller coaster. One of the specialists, Josh, describes the geologic history of the shoreline's terrain, centering on the deep under layers of metamorphic rock, identifying the Pleistocene age when this land was a tropical paradise. I love the way his eyes light up when he mentions droves of woolly mammoths grazing across the savanna, huge flying birds, Pelagornis and Derse, with wingspans up to 24 feet. We stopped at 64 degrees latitude, where Alaska's peninsula juts out into nothing but grayness, while the boat jiggles its way to the shoreline. And there they are suddenly, two massive mammoths, their chalky bones crisscrossed in the hardscrabble, pasty yellow embedded in the brown underbelly of the terrain. I glance at the map, where everything appears pale blue and milky green, and identify the location as Shaktulik in brilliant red lettering. The chill is amazing, but even more impressive is the realization that we are only 4.5 hours out of anchorage. The weather is cooperating, and we can already see colossal specimens. Josh is the first one on land, spike pick in hand, ice and ancient gravel crunching under his boots. I follow quickly behind, steadily peering upward at the overhang, when my left leg goes out from under me and I feel a sudden jolt of pain before recovering myself, partially drenched in seawater. It's just a bruising. As I shake off the intense cold, an Arctic tern glides by, the long curvature of the tusks piercing the vacant sky. You know, Lex Runciman says that you can write a poem about anything. Doesn't make any difference. And like I mentioned before, a certain amount of urgency can really propel a poem. Well, this poem definitely is based on urgency. It's called The Long Drive Between Sixes and Landlord. Last night I was driving home, panicky. I had to go so bad, but nowhere to pull over. And I could feel the urge as I wheeled the truck around every turn, until I could feel gravity, and I had no other choice but to brake and slowly glide against the embankment, unbuckling my seatbelt and opening the car door to the cool night air, unzipping my fly, gazing upward to a veil of stars. It was like nothing on earth, as the Milky Way streamed across the heavens. To the east, Ptolemy's wagon, plowing across a vast luminous field, the Pleiades cast like a handful of jacks. A veritable kaleidoscope of light. And knowing that I was meant to be there, blessed to witness the holiness of the moment, in all its solemnity, regardless of the trail of imminent headlights careening over the horizon in my direction. Okay, so anyway, I live in North Bend, and the adjoining town, I'm sure most of you have probably been to Charleston. Okay, so we spend a lot of time in Charleston. Crabbing, fishing, just walking, enjoying the area. So this is a sort of landscape. It's called Charleston Boat Basin. The sky opens up over the Pacific, and I understand for just this moment, things will never be this way again. The little kingfisher flashes over the boats, rocking in the surf. A long trail of cirrus clouds shimmers into the diaphanous blue sky. 3 boys coast down the ramp, their fishing poles wobbling, the echoes of their footsteps reverberating off the cedar plank dock. Seagulls weaving in and out overhead. The jolly Dee eases away from her berth, groaning in increments, stalling and starting again, trails of black smoke drifting eastward. Her rusty hull slowly revolves into the sunshine. An old woman rises from her pink, white, wet chair. She's been straddling the shadow of the Linda Sioux all day. Slowly, she begins to pull a crab pot to the surface. She sees ribbons of kelp streaming with the tide, sparkling in the foam, and something else, a glimmer of what used to be. Half a mile out, a red buoy sways in the swells, a study of repetition. Its bell reluctantly clangs with each pitch of the waves. And my family had a difficult summer, and my brother-in-law passed away from cancer. So I spent a lot of time with my sister, and so this poem is dedicated to my sister. It's called My Brother-in-Law's Blue Shirt. Now he's passed on, and my sister gently removes the blue wool Pendleton from the closet hanger, where others are still hanging, waiting to be boxed off to the Goodwill. Bill would want you to have this, she whispers. I am imagining him on horseback, cinching the reins, combing the rush of hair on the horse's neck with his fingers, guiding the stirrup, urging the sable mare to move into place, to follow the same trail as yesterday. That's my girl, easy now, you know the way. The hills are still distant as he rounds the sparse stand of firs at the edge of the pasture, steadily rocking in the saddle. It's a good day for riding. The sky is strikingly blue, and the chickadees are stirring in the underbrush, the last remnants of fog fading away. I've been spending some time in the Southwest. My brother is kind of nomadic, sort of. And so he spends the summer in Colorado, and then he lives in an old van in Yuma, Arizona in the winters. And so I went down to visit him. Linda and I went down a couple of months ago. It was wonderful. It was like 75 degrees and sunny. But it's been the source of some poetry for me. And I love, one of my favorite poets is Jim Harrison. And of course, a lot of his history was down there in the Southwest. And so this poem is called Revisiting Jim Harrison, Lost in the Southwest. Did the folks in Yuma embrace you as one of their own, wrapped in a bright striped serape, wandering the vacant streets without shoes? With your one good eye, you archived what others missed. Chihuahuan sunsets over the mesa, mesquite and scorpion weed shimmering in the desert starlight. I want to know what use that other pale dye was to you, how it filtered only the faintest light glowing on an arroyo, the pale specter of a hovering canyon wren. Jim, you left more than you have taken with you. The saguaro cactus stretching beyond the broken hills, ravens drifting in their strange synchronicity, as they circle cathedral rock, locked in their patterns like dark clouds. Is there anything here that has to be explained? I think of you on the way to Gila Flats, the radio fading to static, wild burros scuttling in the underbrush, as you light a cigarette and take a deep draw, inhaling the warm air. Okay, let's take a little bit here.
Do you have any poems about migrants?
About what?
Migrants coming through Yuma.
I don't have poem with migrants coming to you, but I have a poem about migrants, which like you.
No,
Okay. This was for my son. He and I went on a fishing trip, and every time we go out, he gets seasick. Poor guy, he turns it's green, and, like gills. And it's called Minus Tide Depot Bay for John Mitchell. We are not just father and son, but two castaways adrift on the sea, each lost in our own thoughts. The boat veers westward as our lines wobble with the waves, radiant sun licking every movement with fire. We joggle the tackle boxes for just the right lure, anxiously hitching the nylon monofilament, gleaming spacers, spinning leaders, double-pronged hooks, steadying our rods against the pull of the current, the real note rising as the line runs out, then ratcheting in a slow drag, while our shadows flow out with the tide, releasing whatever distance has come between us. We have no words, just the constant hum of the outdoor motor. And here's the telephone for this section. It's called Returning to the River. Looking across the American River, I can't believe the cottonwoods haven't changed. The moon still lingers in the daylight sky. 3 women pass by, and I feel aroused by their chatter, the way they mix words in their womanly improvisation. A gray heron lifts its wings, flutters momentarily before settling in the bulrushes. An old fishing lure catches my attention halfway down the embankment. I nearly fall in, then catch my balance, retrieving the spinner in an edgy swoop. It's the same kind my father used when we paddled across Natomas. It was always found on the second tier of his tackle box. I remember how it gleamed in the sunlight like an engagement ring, but I can't recall ever pulling in any fish. Okay, here come the crows. Crow Genesis. They came from clay, monk-shaped slabs, sliding down mountainsides. The bottom layers of vacant riverbeds, oozing wetlands, black and ominous, God's mystical dream. Alive, not yet, the first squawk, formed by rain, wind, aberrant and soulless, lifts from deep within, shaking the earth, tonal, wretched, unspeakable utterances, rattling the newly formed diaphragm. Arrgh! Last came feathers, an afterthought, a black coat hanging in a dark closet. ruffled black collar, sleek sleeves, tailored from a starless universe, bereft, abandoned after some forgotten dance, cigarettes in the breast pocket, a perfect fit. Vespers, round and round in infinite circles, like a black chain dancing across the clouds. The sky bulges with them. The wind whips them into a frenzy. At last, they settle into a sad field, preening their ruffled feathers, exchanging glances, chanting vespers. Crow Litany. The first lesson was about darkness, about creating enough empty space to call it a void. A vesture of young crows danced in a circle. Then came the stillness, small particles of light, falling like misguided stars through the tree openings. A low murmur drifted over the congregation. Late into the afternoon, the shadows grew longer, overshadowing one another. One by one, the crows turned their eyes toward the waiting moon. The needles on the jack pines ignited like candles as the darkness crept back, covering each fledgling in a satin robe. It's the last one in this section. Melody on a windy night. I was trying to sleep for so many hours in my small house at the end of the day, while the shutters were shuddering and the cat came sauntering up the staircase, mewing like a troubled child. The lamp sputtered and began breathing in deep, glowing intervals. While outside my bedroom window, I saw the moon behind a cloud bank. And even though I don't believe in ghosts, a girl in a white dress looked at me in earnest. Okay, I'm ready to close for arguments.
One more.
Oh. Oh, okay. Okay, here's a short one. It's called Taking the Time. Driving across Oregon in the tree-broken light. At times you come across between the pale fences and fields the most clear water, a steady creek lapping and tumbling into itself in the full sun, cold and fragrant. You face the center of your life with each rivulet rising and falling. Cup your hands and drink.
I don't know if I feel like the microphone is working. But anyway, we are about to have a special question answer moment of our presentation. So Erica is about to catch our readers with a few interesting questions. Yeah, I don't know if this is working or not.
It's working.
It's working. Talk louder.
Yes, makes a difference.
Anyway, I'm gonna hand it over to
You want us to come up there?
Yes, please.
Yes.
All right. You really,
You have to talk into it.
can you hear anything?
Or
No,
like some-
now it's pooped out.
Light is off. Oh, does it have to stay in this?
No.
No. All right. Wow. Magic
Hello. Much better, okay.
buttons. Yay.
Thank you, gentlemen, for the gift of your beautiful poems. You look a little nervous. This won't hurt at all. I have a few questions, and I'm going to start with you, Richard. Do you view your writing as a sort of a spiritual practice?
Yeah.
Touche.
Well, I mean, one thing that I've kind of learned about writing is that it's, I grew up Catholic and there were near occasions of sin. And writing is like a near occasion of self-deception. And you learn a lot in the writing process about how you fool yourselves into thinking things, like you're finished with a poem. And so, that happens often enough so that writing becomes sort of an ethical practice, but it also makes you think about who you are, what shape your soul's in, and stuff like that.
The title of your book, Oratory of Souls,
Yeah.
it's like kind of gives it away there.
That was Spencer's title, but I couldn't mess
Right.
it up.
No, it is a great title. It really is. This is for you, Thomas. Is there one thing that you wish you had that would make your writing life easier? One thing.
I guess maybe a little bit more time. It seems like even though I'm retired, and I should have an ample amount of time, there's so much else that seems to creep into my life. Matter of fact, I'm busier now than I'm retired than I was retired. So I would say that would probably be it.
It's funny, retired people tell me that they are busier than when they were working full time. I don't know what that is about retirement, but I guess I'll never retire because I don't want to be that busy. Richard, you wrote a whole section in your book, Oratory of Souls, that's basically an acrostic section of poems inspired by art. And that's one of my passions is to write poems inspired by art. Could you tell me about your writing process when you're looking at art and how the words come to you? Maybe a little bit about that.
Well, I try to pay attention to how, to what response it's evoking in me, and a different piece of art will sometimes evoke a different kind of response, and also require me to talk about it in a different way. So the Stanley Spencer poems were about these paintings that were in a church, and it was 100 years ago or 80 years ago, and I felt like I shouldn't get in the way. I'm writing these little poems, and what can you do in 7 lines? You can try to capture some of the essence of a piece, and I step back. But in the case of Brian Frank's paintings, I really don't care if the reader can't imagine the original because I haven't given them the details, because it's more about the painting became a prompt for a meditation, and my meditation is the poem. So I don't know if the acrostic police would approve of that, but if there are acrostic police out there, but that's just the way I do it. And different painters, different photographers will end up provoking a different kind of poem for me.
I looked up those paintings on Wikipedia, and I was struck by how unglorious they presented war. It was about the hospital with washing the sheets and dressing the patients, and all the colors were browns and grays. It was really dreary and heartbreaking, more than a battle scene would have been, I think.
Yeah, and the thing about Spencer is he was really into the idea of the holy in the everyday. So like the holiness of changing an injured person's sheets or bringing them tea. And yeah, so it wasn't about war, and it neither glorified the war nor vilified the war. It's sort of like, oh, these people over here are like folding their tents up, and these people over here are, washing the bandages. And that's what he was into.
I would say it didn't really glorify it too much. Thomas, this is for you. What poets, artists, or writers inspire you? Just a few.
Oh, wow. Number one, poets like Walt Whitman, Pablo Neruda, who had a strong sense of voice and usage of sound. Of course, the poets that I was lucky enough, blessed enough to work with, Ted Hugo, Madeline DeFries, and Dennis Schmitz, Rick, Tony, every poet I meet seems to have something that I can learn about. And I found that it's given me a sense of modesty and humility, and to be able to learn from each and every one.
I can't remember which one of you mentioned Denise Levertov. She was an early and lasting influence on my writing. I don't think I'd be a poet if I hadn't found one of her books in my dad's library. So, yeah. Okay, I'm going to ask the audience if you have any questions for our poets. Would you like to ask them anything? Come on, Tony, you can come up with a good question.
Heard from Hazel lately? You heard from Hazel lately?
Yes, I have. I've talked to him a few times. See what they're doing for everyone.
Another poet. Oh, okay, he's other guy because he's a poet.
Tom asked him.
So what do you guys
I don't know. Yes.
Well, if anything, he asks, more specifically, Long Island where?
Oh, did you hear the question?
I did.
Yeah, Long Island,
Where in Long Island?
You know where Long Island is?
of course.
You don't stay.
No,
Where in
where?
Long Island?
That's
I
all.
know.
That's
Okay,
all.
Babylon. Babylon, the South Center.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, not far.
Fantastic. Good. Okay. Love this one.
They sorry.
Oh, great.
Oh, Ingrid? you have a question?
Yeah, question is for, this question is for Rick. I don't, this is working. It's not working anymore?
Oh, maybe it's too
I
far
can
from
hear
the
you.
thing.
Oh,
Oh,
it
it's
just-
like it's off, so. I don't know
So
why.
anyway,
it's
I
turning
can
itself off.
project. I can
Project,
project.
We can use our teachers' voices.
Yeah, all right. You mentioned early in your reading something about Madeline DeFries and what people said about her imagination. And what did people say about her imagination?
She used to say herself that well, when she talked about her process, she talked about her process about, memory, imagination, all being part of this cement mixer. And the
cement
poems are
mixer.
what
It
comes
was
out
the
of the
cement
cement
mixer.
mixer.
That was it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Wonderful poet.
It's not working
And,
out.
and Madeline's poems,
Yeah.
I mean, they're everything in the kitchen sink sometimes.
Yeah. We knew that. Lucky.
I have
Yes, ma'am.
I have a burning question. What actually happened to the tablecloth?
Yeah.
Okay, you're gonna be disappointed because I didn't really have a sister that did that.
Oh.
So, but this is the kind of the fun part of the story. So sometimes, there's just a phrase that you like. And so I liked the phrase, my lost sister. I even noticed that I used to know. So that was my lost sister that I had 3 sisters, but they weren't as mischievous enough as this lost sister would be. So I imagined the lost sister that had to leave, that had to leave the family for some reason. She's a black sheep. So I just made up the idea of the lost sister. But then I found out, like 20 years later, that I actually had a lost sister. My mother got pregnant when she was a junior in high school, and she gave the sister up for adoption. And I did the 23andMe thing, and months passed, and then her granddaughter got in touch with me, and we met, and we had hamburgers, and she's great. And if sarcasm can be inherited, she inherited it. But so I lied about lost sister, but then sometimes you say things in poems that end up a couple of years later being true.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right.
So, sorry I lied, but not sorry. But just one more thing, I'm hogging the stage here. But I used to love those shows when I was growing up, like Tim Max Amateur Hour, you know, they'd have people on the, or Marx Brothers tried it. Or Three Stooges. Yeah. That's a question.
Ingrid, did you have a question? No. Never. Anyone else have a question? Going once, going twice.
Well, I have one more for Rick.
Oh, there you go.
But I made a note on, I think it's your third to last poem when you mentioned that Repke and Levertov and somebody else, poets who knew.
James Wright. Right, oh, James Wright.
Poets who knew, and I like what you said, but I couldn't remember the whole thing.
I haven't met, Reiki or Writer Love poets who seem to know how one soul connected to the whole.
How one soul connected to the whole.
That's beautiful.
Well, okay.
Please go and check out the work of our amazing poets. They have posted